l'or qui est le premier produit d'exportation. Mais nous, jusqu'aujourd'hui au Burkina Faso, c'est l'or qui est le premier produit d'exportation. Mais nous avons lancé le moteur de l'agriculture pour d'abord l'autosuffisance, mais aussi pour le commerce extérieur, l'exportation. Et si vous suivez bien, depuis l'année passée, nous avons lancé l'offensive agricole avec une initiative qui soutient l'offensive. L'objectif, c'est de pouvoir accroître notre production agricole de façon significative, s'autosuffire, mais aussi il y a des produits de rente qu'il faille donc vendre à l'extérieur. Et tout ça doit pouvoir soutenir cette croissance et nous espérons être bien au-dessus de ces chiffres-là. Déjà, quand vous regardez notre production céréalière, on a eu une très bonne croissance en 2024. 2025, nous espérons encore faire mieux. Et ce sont des réformes assez courageuses. Quand vous prenez par exemple, je reste toujours dans l'agriculture, nous avons par exemple décidé, à travers l'initiative de l'offensive, de labourer gratuitement les champs de nos paysans. Donc l'année passée on l'a fait, cette année encore, s'il plaît à Dieu au retour, il y a un bon nombre de tracteurs encore qu'on a acquis, qu'on va mettre à la disposition des cellules mécanisées dans les différents départements pour accroître les superficies emblavées. Nous maximisons beaucoup dans la gestion de l'eau, à travers donc, une structure qu'on a créée, l'ONBA, pour maîtriser l'eau et pouvoir produire au moins 2-3 fois dans l'année. Parce que si on dépend uniquement des pluies, ce serait difficile. Donc il y a ce secteur, le secteur minier aussi, que nous allons continuer de booster pour que le pays lui-même exploite ses propres ressources. Donc nous avons commencé à acquérir des mines, il y a beaucoup de permis qui sont là, que nous sommes en train de développer. Nos ingénieurs ont pu développer les machines nécessaires pour qu'on puisse exploiter nous-mêmes nos ressources. Donc si on met à profit ces deux secteurs, et compléter avec l'industrialisation, c'est-à-dire la transformation de nos produits sur place, qui va nous empêcher d'exporter brut, ça va beaucoup nous amener à entraîner en tout cas une très bonne croissance. Donc ce sont ces réformes qui sont en cours, l'agriculture, l'industrie et beaucoup de secteurs.
All right, welcome to This Month in Africa. Today we are talking about Burkina Faso's revolution under Traoré, what Western media won't show you. So this is a collaborative effort between African Stream and Authentic African, where we break down this month's news and its impact on Pan-Africanism and Africa's independence. Today, we're delving into the impact that Ibrahim Traoré has had on Burkina Faso. We're going to talk about historically what he's been up to and what he is currently doing. This is not what you're going to hear from the West. African Stream has done a great job reporting on it, and we're going to bring it all together in this live stream. So before we begin, let's start with introductions. I'll turn it over to my co-host before I introduce myself.
Greetings. My name is Inem Richardson. I'm very excited to be here once again. I am a journalist with African Stream. I am also the president and co-founder of the Thomas Sankara Center for African Liberation and Unity, a revolutionary Pan-African political and ideological education center and library that's based in both Ouagadougou, the capital city of Burkina Faso, as well as Niamey in Niger. And I am a member of the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, the AAPRP. And I'm really excited. I love talking about the Alliance of Sahel States. And there's lots of good things happening. So we're going to break some of that down for you.
Absolutely. And I am Joe Hatagwa, the founder of Authentic African, a website that is meant to ethically source products made on the continent, handmade, and to share that with the diaspora so that we can help African artisans make a living. I also run Authentic African as a platform on social media where the focus is connecting the diaspora and Africans living on the continent, and also with the sole goal of having Africans in the diaspora do three things: either move, visit, and or invest in the continent of Africa. So with that, I will turn it over to Inem to kick this off before we get into today's news.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so as we started doing every month, we begin our episodes with an ancestor call-in. So we remember one important revolutionary figure, one Pan-African ancestor that came before us. And so today I am calling in Norbert Zongo, who was a Burkinabe journalist, a progressive journalist who covered, he criticized imperialism and he criticized corruption under the regime of Blaise Compaoré. So if you are familiar with Burkina Faso's history, you know that Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary leader who led the country between 1983 and 1987, was brutally assassinated in a CIA and French-backed conspiracy. But the right-hand man that betrayed him, that was next to him and who pulled the trigger more directly, was Blaise Compaoré, and he ruled the country for 27 years. It was a very repressive time. You could hardly say Thomas Sankara's name without facing repercussions. But Norbert Zongo, a courageous journalist, nevertheless worked to expose Blaise Compaoré's corruption, his imperialist backing, and he was killed by the Compaoré government. And so he's considered to be one of Burkina Faso's heroes for his courage.
Excellent. And it's always helpful to have a little bit of insight into some of those who are lesser known, for those of us who are still learning as we go along. So I appreciate that, Inem. So before we get into the next video and give a response to it, I thought we can start by reviewing what we just saw at the opening, right? So, those of you who are just joining, you may have missed it. So I'll do a little bit of some background on the video we just saw, and then we'll give some commentary on what's been done up to this point, and then we can talk about what's happening now. So in that video, Traoré was breaking down all the things that he's done in the time since he's taken office. So they've obviously taken great leaps toward an industrialized, self-sufficient state during that time frame. So he came to power following a people-backed coup in 2022, which we have learned now is really more considered a revolution because that's what the people wanted. In a recent interview he did with RT, where he discussed the changes in the land of upright. So the country has increased agricultural production of both local consumption and export. So he launched industrializations of goods production and enacted mining sector reforms that have put the country's wealth back into the people's hands. So to revolutionize agriculture, the government of Burkina Faso distributed 500 tractors to farmers in May 2024 at a 50% subsidized rate. So alongside the machinery, the government distributed imported agricultural equipment worth over $132 million, and over 1,400 tractors have been made available to farmers since the program began under the new government. In 2024, Burkina Faso also nationalized 2 gold mines, formerly owned by the UK-based Endeavour Mining. So essentially, Burkina Faso is striving to control what it grows on its soil and what is viable under its ground. So critically sidestepping foreign mining companies and international food conglomerates. Burkina Faso also plans to handle the production going forward, ridding itself of the remnants of Western neocolonialism. So that's kind of a brief update on some of the things that has been done. Inem, obviously you've been there since before Ibrahim Traoré came into power, and you've been there back and forth and also living on the ground there since. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on what you've seen on the ground since he's come into power, and then also speak to some of these obviously large shifts that he's made in the country's agriculture and mining sectors.
I mean, even just since this publication was put up by African Stream and the interview was given, there's been, again, even more progress made in terms of bringing in even more farming equipment as well as fishing equipment. I mean, this has been an ongoing thing. We've seen several waves now of bringing in these important, tools and technologies that will be used towards the goals of food sovereignty, self-sufficiency, and industrialization, which are really the cornerstones of Burkina Faso's revolution right now. So I do have some stats. This was on May 22nd, so not so long ago. The president of Burkina Faso, Traoré, visited the city of Bobo Dioulasso, and he gifted the people of Bobo Dioulasso 70,000 tons of mineral fertilizer, 14,631 tons of organic manure, 935 floating cages. These are for, it's a fishing equipment. 1,102 power tillers for farming, 1,033 field motorbikes, 608 608 tractors, 150 multi-purpose shredders, 36 pickup trucks, 17 lorries, 10 sweet potato processing units, and all sorts of different, veterinary and crop protection sort of products. These are just a bunch of numbers. They sounds vague and abstract, but there's another video African Stream did where we showed the images of imagine you see thousands of motorbikes, you see 600 tractors. It's a lot. It really is. And so this is an ongoing thing, as I mentioned. It's hard to really cover everything that's happened because there's, it's been quite a bit in such a short amount of time. But to give an overview, everything to do with increasing production, agricultural production, specifically for local consumption, as opposed to just producing cash crops for export. That's been a major focus. So increase rice production, growing certain fruits that, typically haven't historically been necessarily associated with Burkina Faso. So things like, pineapples and things like this. There's a lot of diversifying sort of the agricultural sector. And then I don't want to give away stuff we're about to talk about as right now too, but there's other things also outside of the food industry and food sector. There is the mining waste refinery and the gold refinery. So the mining waste refinery is now operational, meaning that scraps that, would have probably been either discarded or sent elsewhere, they're now being used to produce gold bars within Burkina Faso. There's so much that's been going on. I mean, I've talked about last month, the Faso Mebo program. So there's this infrastructure and road work program. There's the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland, which are part of this program, but they're broader. So these are young people who are being trained to defend the country and protect the country from imperialist attack, because we have to have that framework anytime we talk about, the war, so-called war on terrorism, but really in the Sahel, we're very clear it's a war against imperialist forces. So we have young people in the thousands who are fighting on the front lines and getting military training, as well as patriotic political education as a part of that training. We have what we call the Waïa, or the Citizens Night Watch, La Veille Citoyenne, which are people who are voluntarily part of this mass network of thousands of people all across the country that are serving as the eyes and ears of the revolution. They come out every single night and every single roundabout across Ouagadougou, across Bobo Dioulasso, and in 2,000 cities and villages to serve as the eyes and the ears of the revolution. I mean, there's so much happening. These are just a little sprinkles of, pieces I can give you. And I'm not covering it all because there's a lot. I mean, there's stuff in terms of the production of more, what do you call it? The clothes that we wear, right. Increasing cotton production, but like Sankara did in his time, again, emphasizing that it's not just for export, but also that we can actually wear the fabrics and promoting that. And then even the military should be wearing locally produced uniforms. There's so much. So yeah, this is the best I can do in terms of giving a brief summary, but really I would say the cornerstones are anything to do with food sovereignty. That's a major goal. Industrialization, that's a major goal. And then security. But when we talk about security, security in a decolonized sense, in a protecting the country from imperialism type of sense.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that was really, really useful and helpful. I mean, you talked about like you said, the cornerstones in the economy. And, we talk about a ton African leaders who any aid that comes in or revenue that's generated from natural resources and or agricultural crop production generally goes into their pockets, right? And they build houses in the West, right? And so what we're seeing with Ibrahim Traoré is exactly what we'd like to see with our other leaders on the continent, right? And also across, what we're seeing the Sahel region in general is what we'd like to see with other leaders. You just mentioned all the different things that aren't really widely reported, and it's not even everything that he's been doing since coming into office. We're going to cover a couple of more stories and some more videos on some of the things that he has actually done. And so, yes, so Afuya is asking, is this live? This is live, yes. And we'll talk about, there's some other questions too about the U.S. delegation, and we'll get to some of those questions in a moment. We just want to make sure we give Ibrahim Traoré his flowers and express all the things that he's actually been up to, because I don't know if there's enough of that being discussed in the level of detail that we're going into today. So I think you gave some very detailed notes on the numbers, right? The number of tractors brought in, number of bikes brought in, all of those things. I think those are really important to understand. And so if you guys missed any of that, just press rewind and go back and watch that again. But there was a number of things that were made, a number of points that were made. All right, so next we'll talk about the mausoleum that was unveiled in Burkina Faso. Because I do think that it's also important to honor our ancestors, as we do on this call. We do the call to the ancestors, right? And so in this case, we see that Ibrahim Traoré has also been operating in the same way. And so, obviously, Captain Traoré has actually created a mausoleum for Burkina Faso's revolutionary former president, Captain Thomas Sankara, who was unalived, unfortunately, in 1987. Obviously, he remains a towering presence in his home country, figuratively and now literally. So on the 27th of May, 2025, Ouagadougou unveiled its new Thomas Sankara mausoleum, designed by acclaimed Burkinabe architect Francis Ezekeri. The 87-meter tall structure is a bold statement on African self-reliance, unity, and resilience. The 14-hectare site includes the building which Sankara drew his last breath. It's now encircled by a reflective water feature, and a tower offers panoramic views of the capital. The space includes garden parks, community centers, and educational hubs where Sankara's radical ideas will continue to inspire generations. And this short video gives you a glimpse. We will give some commentary on the other side.
Sankara Mausoleum. It's a tribute to the country's slain revolutionary president. Sankara was assassinated in 1987. The country's current president is often compared to him. Ibrahim Traoré was represented by his PM at the inauguration. The site also houses 12 comrades who were killed alongside Sankara. It integrates green spaces and communal areas. It's home to artifacts and resources relating to Sankara's life and ideology, including personal belongings and speeches. An 87-meter tower offers panoramic views of the capital. A restaurant shaped like Burkina Faso sits at the top. The memorial was designed by prize-winning Burkinabe architect Francis Here. The opening ceremony was attended by thousands of citizens as well as dignitaries. Traoré seized power in a 2022 nation-backed coup. His anti-imperialist vision echoes Sankara's. Under Traoré, Burkina Faso became a founding member of the Alliance of Sahel States. The bloc also includes Mali and Niger. The trio hope to create a unified Pan-African federal state.
Now, I must say, before we get into the mausoleum, I do want to say that as Inem mentioned earlier, she is the president of the Thomas Sankara Center, which, obviously you were a bit ahead of the times when you and your co-founders opened this up in Burkina Faso and now Niger. So I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are on the mausoleum as well, since this is something that obviously was needed. You guys have kind of led the wave on that, and it looks like obviously the leadership in Burkina Faso has also followed suit. and done something similar. So your thoughts on, you know, where we are today with the Thomas Sankara Mausoleum, and maybe a little bit about what you've done as well, since we're on the topic of honoring Thomas Sankara.
Sure, definitely. So I'll say, the Thomas Sankara Mausoleum is a project of the Thomas Sankara Memorial, which is an institution that we have a great relationship with as the Thomas Sankara Center. We collaborate with them all the time. We work together closely, and many of our comrades are members of the Thomas Sankara Center, attended this inauguration of the mausoleum. They were there on the day of its opening, and, right afterwards, we hosted the director of the mausoleum at our center to do to speak kind of on a panel with the community. So we have a great relationship with them, and I think this is also reflective of the fact that this really is a government that is trying its absolute hardest to follow in the Sankara footsteps, like that path that he laid out. And the mausoleum is like one example, and it's been a long time in the making. So, previous governments, mostly Roch Kaboré, not so much Blaise Compaoré, but Roch Kaboré, who was there prior to TRAORÉ, like basically announced that he would work on the mausoleum. It would happen one day, but it never really came to fruition. It was like this project that was sitting there, kind of not entirely inactive and not entirely moving forward either. And so TRAORÉ, when he comes to power, he takes it very, very seriously. And he's like, you know what, we're doing it. Burkina Faso's leading architect, who's actually one of Africa's leading architects, Francis Carré, he was the one who designed this the building. It's a beautiful building, and it's like still just the beginning. They're going to keep building it, more and more until it's like this large tower. But yeah, so I mean, it's a really important project, and like I said, the Thomas Sankara Center works closely with them. We do political education work, and so we are a Pan-African lending library. We have books that include like Thomas Sankara's speech collections. We have books by Ahmed Sékou Touré, Kwame Nkrumah, Frantz Fanon. And then we do events where we talk about and educate the public about Sankara. So to give you an idea, we recently celebrated African Liberation Day. So we had in Burkina Faso, we had film screenings in different communities of the film Capitaine Thomas Sankara, or Captain Thomas Sankara in English. And we brought those to different communities in the city. And then we did the panel with the director of the mausoleum. And then in Niger, we did the same thing. We had a film screening about Thomas Sankara, and we had actually an exchange with his two brothers, Paul and Valentin Sankara, who talked about what it was like to grow up with Thomas Sankara. So there's a lot right now of work to do in terms of like there's like a national and even regional sort of reflection happening in terms of going back to the Sankara era, thinking about what it means. And a big thing I should mention is that Ibrahim Traoré recently announced that the government would be working towards reopening the Institute, l'Institut du Peuple Noir. So it's like Institute of Black People, which is a project that Thomas Sankara started. So if you read his speech collections, he came to Harlem and he talked to the Africans there, the African diaspora of Harlem. And he basically said, we're building this institute of, in honor of Black people and Black culture. Like basically it's a cultural institute to celebrate, Black people worldwide. And he basically said, you in Harlem, come and check it out. And then of course, Sankara was assassinated. The project didn't really come to fruition that much. Like it was a brief-lived thing that didn't have much of an impact in reality, other than something that Sankara deeply believed in. But TRAORÉ is like, we're doing it. We have the blueprint that Sankara laid out for us. We're opening up this institute for Black people. So there's a lot that's happening in terms of retracing the Sankara legacy.
Awesome, and I think that what you guys are doing in conjunction with the Thomas Sankara Mausoleum and the government in terms of what they're looking to do with this particular legacy, I think is important for the next generation of Pan-Africanists, right? Those growing up who plan to go into politics, or even just who plan to go into any of the business sectors. I think having this legacy and this understanding of the revolutionaries that came before, I think is really important for ensuring that, Traoré's legacy and what he does gets built upon as time goes on. There was a couple of comments, one in particular that I thought was interesting and wanted to look at and cover before we move into the next video. And Afuya is saying there's so many news channels talking about Ibrahim Traoré. You really don't know what to believe, especially when it comes to his safety and overall welfare. And I'll just say something really quickly, and I'll turn it over to you, Inem. But I think the part of the reason why we decided to come back with this month in Africa as opposed to this week in Africa, when we came back, we wanted to focus on the misinformation around what's happening in the AES. You have Inem, who is a journalist on the ground in country, who can speak to what is actually happening on the ground, and can tell us what is the truth versus what is out there in terms of propaganda from the West perspectives, and then also well-meaning folks who are just getting things wrong, right? They're just incorrect. And so, I think that's the import of this particular live stream, is to make sure that we cover those things properly so you're aware. So I think if you come here every month, and we'll try to keep it consistent on certain months, but we've been traveling, so that's why this is later in June than it normally would have been. We will be sharing the details of what's real and what's not, and that's why we're doing this live stream. So I did just want to take a moment to address that particular comment. And I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Inem, but I think that's why this live stream is so important.
I think you've more or less said it all. I completely agree. There is a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of propaganda. There's a lot of confusion. So yeah, it is hard to sort it out, but I do encourage you to check out this show, watch our previous episodes and stay tuned for future episodes, because we try very hard to break down what's happening for real and, with solid proof. And like Joe said, I'm on the ground in the region. I'm in Burkina, or I'm in Niger. So yeah, I think you said it all.
Okay, great. Yeah, so moving on to the next story and shifting gears just a bit. Well, not really shifting gears, but really getting back to the core of this message in this live stream. And it's about Traoré building the cashew factories. So Burkina Faso's president, Ibrahim Traoré, recently laid the first stone to open a cashew apple processing factory in the southwestern department of Penny. This is part of the government's plan to expand local cashew production. So he suggested establishing more such factories in the southern municipalities. He then visited the newly resurrected cashew nut factory. The largely women-operated factory had gone under after struggling financially for many years, but the government reopened it in May of 2025. So these developments follow the government's suspension of raw, unrefined cashew exports in April, allowing it to begin refining cashew products locally. I think before we get into the video, I just want to mention that one of the issues that we see on the continent is raw earth minerals, raw products are made on the continent and refined elsewhere. And the challenge with that is when it gets refined elsewhere, in order to come back to the country of origin, it is at a premium cost. And so once you can refine these things, oil, minerals, cashews, you can then sell it to your own people at a price that is affordable for locals. And there are people who can generate income from it locally. And then you can also sell it more as a premium externally, which is the main goal anyway. So I did just want to mention that. Let's jump into the video, and then we will have some more commentary on the other side.
President Ibrahim Traoré laid one of the first stones for the construction of a cashew apple processing factory in the town of Penny. Valued at over $10 million and generating more than 1,200 direct and indirect jobs, it will transform 5,000 tons of cashew apples, the fruit from which the tree nut grows, into juice, wine, vinegar, and ethanol. Traoré expressed an interest in opening similar factories across the country.
Le potentiel est existant. Comment est-ce qu'on peut faire pour dupliquer ce modèle? Borodara, Banfura et et Gawa.
Bien reçu.
Parce que je crois que dans toutes ces zones-là,
Oui, oui.
on produit beaucoup.
Traoré also visited the CN Anatrans Cashew Nut Factory on 23 May in the city of Bobo Dioulasso. Financial challenges had shut down the factory in July 2024. It was resurrected by the Burkinabe Fund for Economic and Social Development, bringing back 1,300 jobs, 90% of which were held by women. On 2 April 2025, Burkina Faso suspended the export of raw cashews to shift towards locally processing the nut. In 2024, Burkina Faso processed 16,000 tons of cashews, or 10% of its harvest. However, the country has had the capacity to produce almost double that amount, or 30,000 tons per year, since 2021.
Yeah, so obviously Inem reported on that story there. So anything you want to add to what you reported on in the story there and the preamble that I had before the video played?
Yeah, just a couple things. I mentioned earlier that Traoré, and not just him, but like the government as a whole and the people of Burkina Faso are working very hard to diversify their agricultural sector in order to, achieve food sovereignty. We say like self-sufficiency in French, but food sovereignty in English. But I think there's another side of it, which is like, and not just diversifying and adding new crops, but also Traoré and the government are asking questions like, what are we already doing that we could be doing better? What are we doing that we could be doing differently? And I think that's what we're seeing with the cashew sector in particular. Like Burkina Faso has been growing cashews for a very long time. I don't know how long, but a very long time. Burkina has been producing cashews, but just kind of exporting this raw cashew product, not even something even necessarily in like an edible format in terms of like something you could go into the store and buy some roasted cashews or something. No, like just, and so the government basically said we're putting a halt, no more cashew exports for now, in the raw form, at least no more raw cashew exports. Let's figure out what we can do with the product that we're already growing. The other thing that I really like is you see that towards the end of the video, Traoré visits a factory that was actually on its last leg. It was shutting down, and he and the government were able to successfully resurrect the factory, and basically bring those jobs back. And it was like you look inside the factory, it's like 90% women. It's all these women who are working, and so that's a huge thing. It's a huge thing for people, and there's parallels such as Burkina Faso's national airline company, Air Burkina. Yep. I actually had an issue with the airline myself because I purchased a flight and the company went bankrupt. It was over, and my flight was canceled. Everything was canceled, and then he's back, and it has purchased its first new aircraft in decades, many decades, because of support from the government, which is really trying to invest in sovereignty in the long term. And then just one final comment on this. The other thing that really impresses me about this video, and this is kind of foreshadowing for the next video too, because you're going to see a parallel here. But I'm really happy about a comment that Traoré made in this video where he basically said, hey, if this model is working, why not, look at expanding it across other towns? And he even named like a number of towns where they could potentially build these factories. And again, I feel like I'm going to overlap with what I plan to say for the next video, or like something that's going to come up again. But I just think it's really great that, what we typically see in Africa is, the capital cities will have all the focus and all the industry will be built in the capitals, all of the development, the infrastructure, it's all concentrated in the capitals, and the rest of the country is kind of sometimes just exploited. Like there's farmers that feed the capital, do all these things for the capital, and then they don't get anything in return. Versus Traoré and the government in Burkina they're really like spreading out where their focus. And so they're building these factories, not just in like one or two big cities, but they're looking to bring them all across the country, including in areas that are relatively more rural than, the two largest cities in the country. So that's another thing that's very exciting.
Absolutely. And, and I mentioned this earlier, but, when people say, what is the purpose of government, right? Generally, in the West, you'll say to build roads, to do infrastructure, right? And it just seems like that's a given, right? Infrastructure. Okay, what does infrastructure mean? And, you know, in many capitalist societies, a lot of that lives with private companies. And, you know, private companies can have leaders who are not elected by the people, who are responsible for doing things that the people either are negatively impacted by or potentially can benefit from. And I think in a great government is one like what Ibrahim Traoré is running, right? Where you focus on infrastructure, you create jobs for people, and you ensure that the people of the country are benefiting most from what you are building and creating, because it is coming from the ground that they live on and the ground that they live off of. And so I think it's just really important to see how the rhetoric is coming to fruition, right? He said a lot of things that he wanted to do as he was coming into power, and he's literally checking off everything on that list. And you guys were watching it happen in real time. I think at some point in time, we'll look back on all the work that he's done and see it as a model for what other folks can be doing. So I don't know if there was any specific comments or questions that you wanted to cover, Inem. I know that there was a couple of, there's a lot of comments, so we appreciate all of you for engaging as much as you have. We can't get to everyone and all of the comments, but there may be a few here that we can respond to. I don't know if there's anything you want to respond to now, or do we want to wait till after the next story?
There's a couple that we can maybe touch on, or I can touch on quickly.
Sure.
There was a question about, well, actually this one, actually I was going to pull it up, but now that I think about it, we're going to touch on something similar later. So actually let's hold off on that one because I think it might fit in somewhere else. Somebody asked about the African Spiritual Day. That is a real thing. So it's May 15th. It's in English, it would be something like the Day of Customs and Traditions, but in practice, it really is a way of recognizing the population of Burkina Faso that practices indigenous African spiritual practices or traditional African spiritual practices. So the government puts a lot of emphasis on religious harmony between Muslims, Christians, and in Burkina they say animists, but I guess in English maybe we'd say like traditional African religions. There's a lot of emphasis on this question of unity. So I think it will be very hard for the West to divide Burkina Faso on this religious basis, because the government is trying very hard to make sure that everybody feels included. So, you know, Traoré is always at like all of the religious events, including for the traditional African spiritual practices. So that's a real thing, May 15th. There was, I think, maybe I'll do one more comment, because the other one I realized fits better in the Langley conversation.
Sure.
There was somebody who had a criticism, and I do want to address it, actually, talking about Norbert Zongo, but I wouldn't talk about this particular journalist that was arrested in Burkina Faso. And I just want to give some food for thought and for some context here. And I think it is fair to address this, because this is one of the main sort of hit pieces against Burkina Faso in the Western press right now. It's like they're trying very hard to do this freedom of speech, freedom of expression type of thing. I'm a journalist and I live in Burkina Faso, and I just want us to be very honest about something. First of all, I don't think that there is any country on the planet Earth where, at least I haven't come across one, you tell me if I'm wrong, where you can absolutely say anything you want to with zero consequence, and there's like 100% freedom of speech, zero repercussions. You can literally just go up and say whatever you want. I don't think it exists. Personally, I have never seen it. Right. I think people are very unfair when they accuse Burkina Faso and also Mali and Niger of this sort of lack of freedom of expression thing, because, you know, I mean, for one, these are countries in war. The United States doesn't have freedom of expression, but what's its excuse? Because it's, you know, the world's leading imperialist power. It kicked African Stream off of like every social media platform based off of a statement that it made without any proof. You know, this is Anthony Blinken, who basically censored our own page. But we want to hold Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, these countries that are under imperialist attack, to a higher standard than, like, you know, these imperialist countries. And I just think it doesn't make sense. And the other thing I want to say is I think that Norbert Zongo, we have to understand Norbert Zongo as a journalist during his time was somebody who defended the interests of the majority of the people. So that's why he was killed, because he was exposing corruption and a neo-colonial reactionary government that was hurting the majority of the people, which I think is very different from a journalist who is promoting their individual or their individual interests, or like one person kind of being like, my voice matters more than the majority. So I think we have to have this perspective. I think if you're defending the majority of the people, you're with the people, then, there's no issue. But I think if you're like, I'm willing to destabilize the revolution for my individual personal gain, then you'll probably face consequences for that. It's about the collective over the individual. And so anyways, that's what I have to say about that. I think there's one more comment that after the Langley piece, we should maybe look at.
Absolutely. And just to add to that last piece, in the United States, of course, we have freedom of speech and assembly, right? That is the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. However, that is not freedom from consequences. As you mentioned, people get canceled, and African Stream was literally canceled from the internet, right? And as you said, based on a false statement made by the former Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, who made accusations without backing it up at all. And the very next day, the African Stream YouTube channel, Instagram page, Facebook, Google, all were taken down, right? And so, again, as you mentioned, you cannot hold Burkina Faso to a higher standard than you hold the West to. And as you said, there is no one country where you can say anything without consequence, especially if it's not true, right? So in this instance, African Stream was talking about things that were absolutely true. In no way were they able to dispute what African Stream said, right? In any real way. So the best thing they could do was remove African Stream as a platform, and there's just a few social media platforms that allowed African Stream to exist and continue to exist, which is why we see so many people on here from X, because that was the one of the last places where African Stream could exist in its form of African Stream. So I did want to just add to that, because that's, I think, really important, and I'm glad you called out that comment for sure. Okay, so now to the next story. As we mentioned, the cashew apples and the cashew factories, up and running for refining. We now want to move to dairy factories opening across Burkina Faso. So in the heart of West Africa, a revolution is underway, as we mentioned. So this powerful clip from Ghanaian YouTuber Wode Maya shows when he recently visited Burkina Faso to document the country's bold steps forward and toward sovereignty, starting with cow's milk. So on the 27th of March, Burkina Faso inaugurated the first state-owned dairy factory in the capital of Ouagadougou. Then on the 18th of May, Burkina Faso opened another dairy factory in the city of Fada-Goma. The government also plans to open 3 more in municipalities across the country, and these facilities would allow Burkina Faso to produce yogurt, butter, and cheese, and also powdered milk. So only 2% of the national milk production is currently collected and processed, while almost 12 billion CFA francs, $20 million, are spent each year on importing dairy products. So this is a really important thing to reduce the amount of expenditures importing. I mean, $20 million a year can now be replaced instead of having that being imported, that can now be done within the country. So this project aligns with Burkina Faso's objective of food sovereignty and industrialization, which Traoré has prompted. So on 20th of February, Burkina Faso also inaugurated a flour mill in the outskirts of Ouagadougou. Furthermore, on the 16th of December 2024, and he inaugurated the SOFATO tomato paste factory in northern Yako department. The first factory, launched on November 30th, is the country's second largest city, was done as well. So the new factories aim to transform how Burkinabe people consume food, reducing dependence on exports by relying on what the farmers and workers can produce domestically. Former revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso, obviously Thomas Sankara, famously stated, "Where is imperialism? Look at your plates when you eat. The imported grains of rice, corn, and millet, that is imperialism. Let's not look any further." So he championed the message, produce what you consume and consume what you produce. So today, Traoré seems to not only have taken Thomas Sankara's message to heart, but he's implementing it. So let's watch this video and give some commentary on the other side.
Processing factory.
Oh, wow.
There will be 5 of them. One of them is already functional in Ouagadougou.
In this factory, they convert the raw milk into butter, cheese, yogurts, and fresh milk for people to consume. This is what happens when you get yourself a revolutionary leader who believes in the dreams and ideologies of his people.
So I know you started to tease this a little bit, but you had some comments from the previous video on the cashew apple video. So yeah, I'll turn it over to you to give your thoughts on this particular video by Wode and the dairy production that's happening in Burkina Faso now.
Yeah, I mean, so this video was filmed likely the last week of April. It seems like that was when Wodemaya was in Burkina Faso. I might be getting my dates slightly wrong, but he was there like pretty recently, you know, probably like a month or so ago. In that short span of time, a secondary factory has already been opened. So Fadan Gorma has now a similar dairy factory. And again, like this is just very exciting because, you know, it's great to have things in Ouagadougou. I live in Ouagadougou, so I want to see things, you know, obviously in the city where I live. But it's amazing that even places that are not necessarily these like big cities or these capital cities are also getting this sort of this attention from the government. They're getting these jobs that are spread out across different regions. And, you know, they're seeing this like industrialization project is really happening countrywide. And so like was said in the video, there's plans for 5 of these dairy factories. And, you know, most of them are not going to be in big cities. You know, most of them are actually going to be more in like towns or in villages. And so it's really, really good. I mean, this is what I said last time, but I don't think this is a typical thing that most African leaders tend to do. Whenever there's any opportunity for industrialization, we tend to see it hyper-focused just on the capital. But we're really seeing this like widespread national uplift and economic transformation. So yeah, I mean, this is kind of the gist of what I said, but I want to reemphasize it that you know, you can go to different parts of Burkina Faso and see transformations happening everywhere. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, and I think you said it all. I mean, I don't have much to add there. Just to say that, you know, this is just another example of sovereignty, right? Food sovereignty. There's a lot of presidents who come into office across the continent of Africa who say they want to have more food sovereignty. They have food programs and they enter these alliances with these large international groups. And we don't really see much transformation in country. And that's because a lot of the funding that comes into those countries go into the pockets of those leaders. And so we see here that the money that the government has is going directly into infrastructure development, creating jobs, training people, and changing the future of the country. I do also want to mention that what people don't talk about a lot is jobs create dignity. And a lot of times that same dignity comes with country pride and the want to see the country continue to thrive and grow. And that leads to a good form of nationalism. And that nationalism ensures that people are willing to do what they can to continue the growth of that country economically and the spirit of a country culturally. And so I just think it's really important to call that out because I don't think it's talked about enough, the number of jobs that are being created through these processes, which then of course lead to you know, changing the complexion of the country and where it's going. We have another video that we're going to jump into really quickly before we have some commentary. So I'm gonna talk you guys through and then we'll get to that in a second. So you guys might remember that Ibrahim Traoré actually had laid out So basically, he was on a couple of news outlets while in Russia a little over a month ago, and one of the statements he said is stop using black people against black people. He spoke about General Michael Langley about betraying black people, basically. So he gave such comments during an interview news outlet with Sputnik Afrique on the 12th of May in Moscow in response to Langley's comments on the 3rd of April that were at the U.S. Senate Committee and on armed services, and that but basically he said that Traoré was using recently reclaimed gold reserves to protect the quote-unquote junta regime. Langley's claim enraged Africans worldwide, as you guys remember, prompting video messages on social media platforms. The solidarity protests broke out on the 30th of April in Burkina Faso and worldwide, including in cities such as London, Paris, and Accra, Ghana. However, as Traoré pointed out in the clip, Langley is not the first Black person to work in service of imperialism. As this video states, Barack Obama destabilized Libya with the 2011 US-led NATO invasion. So have you noticed Black people working as agents in Western imperialism? What other examples can you guys think of? Let's go to this video and have some commentary on the other side. I think there's a bit of a delay, but that'll happen in a second. Give us a moment.
M'a le plus fait mal. Pas parce qu'il est général ou parce que c'est un Américain. Et ça fait très mal. Voilà, c'est très dangereux. On a encore un noir. Et je souhaite peut-être qu'il fasse un mea culpa. Il a parlé de l'or du Burkina qui sert à ce que nous on utilise pour se protéger et tout. D'abord, c'est l'or du Burkina, c'est pas son or. Ça, c'est la première des choses. En quoi ça le regarde? Ça le regarde, il faut que ça s'arrête maintenant. La race noire ne doit pas être utilisée pour combattre les noirs. Ils peuvent le regretter, par plusieurs canaux, ils essaient de se rattraper. Mais non, ça a été dit publiquement, il faut se rattraper publiquement. Africain a compris, la jeunesse noire dans le monde entier a compris. Cette manipulation ne passe plus.
All right, so in the interest of time, what we'll do is we will combine Langley's response with this video, and then there was another 2 videos that we want to cover quickly. Inem has to get to the airport so that she could fly back to Burkina Faso. So we want to make sure that we give you guys the videos, but we also need to, you know, be respective of Inem's time. So what we'll do is we'll get into Langley's response, and then we'll give a response to that, and then 2 more videos, and then a response to that as well.
Recently, the Senate seemed to suggest that he's diverting, General Traoré, is diverting its 4 billion gold reserves to sustain his military rule rather than for public welfare. These remarks sparked widespread, condemnation across the continent. What did you mean by that statement?
Let me speak to Burkina Faso's sovereignty. They maintain their sovereignty. They make their decisions how they use their resources. They make their decisions who their resources go to for military support. That's their sovereign right. But my cautionary tale was just from a military perspective. That was a Senate Armed Services Committee asking me a direct question. Burkina Faso, a lot of great things going on to progress them forward, okay? But then when you look at the military part of it, knowing that that's the epicenter of global terrorism, it was my time to illuminate that this is probably their weakest point, and there needs to be sufficient resources going towards for the whole fight of terrorism in that country. period.
So what are your thoughts on what Langley said in this interview? I mean, obviously this is a clip from the interview. It was a little bit longer than this. There was a lot of questions asked and it's been going viral. I clipped it and put it on Authentic African. I've seen other people clipping it. Your thoughts to what Langley said here in terms of the terrorism, because that's been his excuse. And he mentioned that they're allowed to have their sovereignty. They're not going to put any boots on the ground. There's a lot more that he said in this interview, but I'd love to get your thoughts.
So two things. First of all, I loved President Ibrahim Traoré's response to Langley to begin with. I don't know. It's just like he's definitely picking up a more and more sort of like Black power type of rhetoric. I don't know. I feel like the way he speaks now, there's a Pan-African consciousness there. And there's kind of like a, we say that Black power, Pan-Africanism is the highest stage of Black power. Anyways, I think Traoré really is, he's clear about, who his folks are and what he expects from our people, and also how we're used against one another. I don't know. I really have been feeling like there's some sort of like a militancy that's even growing further and further, like stronger and stronger in his latest interviews. As for Langley, I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, what a load of I don't know if I can say that, but I can't. Here's the thing. He's saying that, okay, my critique of Traoré is a military critique. Not one time when you were actually asked about Burkina Faso at that hearing did you even mention a military threat. So you're talking about something that has nothing to do with your actual response. The question that was posed to him, the original question was very clear. It was basically like, is China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is a trade initiative China's developing, is it like fueling corruption in Africa? And he's like, yes, in Burkina Faso. So I don't know. I mean, him trying to act like actually, my concern was about like the growing threat of insecurity the whole time, like in terms of like terrorist operations. Where's the connection? I mean, my goodness, it has nothing to do. That has nothing to do with what you were talking about. I mean. Right. You're completely just making something up on the spot as an excuse, but it has nothing. That's not what you said at all. I mean, there wasn't even like 1% of what he originally said in his statement that has any relevance to what he's claiming his concern is now. So clearly there's a lot of hypocrisy. I actually think it would have probably been more respectable if he would have had like stood with his 2 feet, on the ground firmly and said, this is what I said and what I meant, and I mean it. But now he just seems like, first of all, he is disingenuous. He seems like a coward. I don't know what if he regrets it, he should say he regrets it and apologizes, but he doesn't regret it. He's kind of like, I don't know. I just think he's cowardly then. But anyways, his rhetoric, the first time around was great for Traoré. It led to an international spark of solidarity with Burkina Faso. So if anything, keep talking, Langley, don't walk back on it. Go double down, because it seems to only make things stronger in terms of the respect and the defense and protection of Burkina Faso and Traoré as the leader.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to that point, obviously, Traoré mentioned the terrorists in the region and his discussion of the terrorists in the region and his quote unquote concerns about the growth of these terrorist groups. And so I think Traoré actually did a great job of expressing who is backing and funding these terrorist groups. And not only Burkina Faso, but Niger has also had some statements on this. So let me quickly just talk about how this has been looked at from the Sahel perspective, and then we'll watch 2 videos and give some commentary on the other side. So in terms of how it's been described, it's not terrorism, it's imperialism. All of the imperialist countries finance these fighters. So we're talking about these threats to what's happening in the Sahel region with these Western-backed individuals that operate as terrorist groups. So these are the words of Burkina Faso President Ibrahim Traoré during an interview when he said it's not terrorism, it's imperialism. During that interview with RT, This is not the first time that an official from Africa's Sahel region has accused Western or Western allied countries of aiding terrorists. In 2022, Mali's prime minister said France had provided arms, ammunition, and intelligence to terrorist organizations that it claimed to be fighting during its now dissolved operation, essentially a French military occupation of Mali. Shortly thereafter, Mali's Minister of Foreign Affairs submitted a letter to the United Nations stating that France illegally violated Mali's airspace to gather information for quote-unquote terrorist groups, in addition to supplying them with weapons. And then we'll speak just quickly about Niger's president, who said that France is intertwined with terrorists. Just a few days before the 83rd birthday of former Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, on the 31st of May clip, Nigerian President Tiani came forward once again to accuse imperialist powers of destabilizing his country. This time, he zoomed in on the role of France, the United States and European Union, and NATO, especially the part in supporting what he says, supporting terrorism within the Sahel region. He specifically criticized NATO for its 2011 invasion and destruction of Libya, which led to NATO-backed rebels who unalived Gaddafi in a very gruesome way. Upon Gaddafi's assassination, violent militias gained access to Libyan weapons. They flooded the Sahel with those arms, enabling Al-Qaeda and other Islamic groups to seize multiple territories in northern Mali. So for the next several years, various terrorist organizations would continue to reap chaos in Mali and neighboring Burkina Faso. I will leave it there on the commentary for now. Let's get into these two videos and give some commentary on the other side.
Nous maintenir dans une guerre permanente, qu'on ne puisse pas se développer et continuer à piller nos richesses. Tous les pays impérialistes financent ces combattants. Voilà, ils sont nombreux. Oui, les terroristes, ils sont renforcés par beaucoup de combattants étrangers qui viennent d'ailleurs, qui ne sont pas en fait, quand je prends le cas de Burkina, il y a beaucoup de criminels qui sont burkinabés mais qui ne sont pas burkinabés. Il y a aussi des formateurs qui viennent de beaucoup de pays pour les apprendre beaucoup de techniques. C'est malheureux, ils l'ont déclaré ouvertement qu'ils soutiennent les terroristes. Nous avons aussi pu remarquer effectivement avec un certain nombre de technologies que les terroristes ont pu avoir, que ça vient d'eux. C'est malheureux, c'est très malheureux, mais toujours est-il qu'on ne s'apitoie pas sur notre sort. Et nous avons pris la mesure de la chose, nous allons nous adapter, nous allons les combattre et ils ne pourront pas vaincre.
Et nous savons quels sont les acteurs, nous savons ce qui s'est passé en Libye et nous savons quels sont les acteurs qui étaient derrière ce qui s'est passé en Libye et quelles sont les conséquences de cette intervention face à laquelle, malheureusement, nos pays africains n'ont pas eu le courage d'élever la voix. Je rappellerai quels sont les acteurs qui sont derrière cette situation que nous vivons aujourd'hui. Ces acteurs ne sont autres que la France, accompagnée de l'Union européenne, malheureusement, et du régime sortant des États-Unis d'Amérique. C'est une guerre informationnelle, c'est une guerre de déstabilisation, c'est une guerre de néocolonisation qui est conduite avec les financements français, européens et occidentaux. Mais des puissances, je le répète, néocoloniales, impérialistes, occidentales. La France et ses autres acolytes ne se sont pas limités à la création de ces cellules où elles ont confié des missions bien particulières. La France a également infiltré tous les mouvements qui initialement étaient appelés des mouvements indépendantistes, ensuite des mouvements djihadistes et enfin des mouvements terroristes.
So in those two videos, we heard from Ibrahim Traoré and Tiani just both speaking in very plain terms as to who they believe is behind what is going on with these terrorist groups. And specifically, I think calling out regime change and how that has a power vacuum and what ends up happening there. So, you know, we as the United States, and before I turn it over to you, Inem, I just want to mention that the United States on many occasions has said that they do not believe in regime change. And that has been the theory and practice of the United States government. They do not believe in regime change. But when they do operate with regime change, you see that it opens up a power vacuum for terrorists, and that leads to destabilization in the region. And that's what we're seeing in the Sahel. So I want to turn it over to you, Inem, to maybe speak to that a bit before we close this live stream out.
Yes, I mean, this is just so important. And I realize, like, so within the Sahel, people have a very broad understanding and there's a general consensus in terms of who is funding and backing these terrorist organizations. It's a common question that has been posed for a couple years now in terms of how are these terrorist groups getting their arms. They're so well armed. They have very advanced equipment and technology, even though a lot of them are in the middle of the desert and they're nowhere near anywhere that actually manufactures arms. And now we have all three leaders of the AES countries, all three Sahelian, the Alliance of Sahel State countries leaders have come forward to say explicitly that imperialist forces are backing and arming these terrorist organizations. So Mali was the first, as you said, in 2022 to come forward at the level of the United Nations and basically say that we have proof that France is violating our airspace, basically illegally operating, aircraft over Mali in order to use that to get information, to give that intelligence, that information to the terrorist organizations that they claim to have previously fought against, as well as to use that to supply terrorist organizations with equipment. That was their statement. And because France is a member of the UN Security Council, they vetoed Mali's basically a presentation of their facts, and the proof was never delivered to the Security Council because France has power and the UN unfortunately isn't actually democratic. Now we see very clearly that both Presidents Chani and Traoré are very clear. These are two interviews that happened within the span of a few weeks. That imperialist organizations are backing these groups, supplying equipment or intelligence, or otherwise assisting terrorist organizations. I think Chani. I like the comment somebody left about the importance of Chani and the importance of Goita. I think they're both kind of underrated relative to Traoré, but it was a wonderful interview that Chani gave. It was a couple hours long, and it was on Saturday the 31st of May, and he just broke it down. He was just very clear, and I like that he also really cites explicitly the names of these imperialist organizations. He says France, he says the European Union, he says the United States. Somebody left a comment that said NATO. It's a pan-European alliance, and it has terrorized Africa for a very long time now. And I think that most people who live in kind of thing where it's like 50 years from now will have declassified documents on their side now, on like the NATO side, basically saying like, oh, I'm so sorry, I think we're going to see this kind of thing where we have like these fakes. Oh, I'm so sorry. That's going to come out in like 50 years. But like, listen to us now in 2025, as we're telling you that this is real. And that they're saying that they have evidence that, this is what's going on. Alliance of Sahel States, a lot of people just don't know how this operates and where these terrorists are coming from. And just one last thing, because I know we are kind of short on time, but back in the day, the United States used to fund death squads across Central America, places like Nicaragua, Guatemala, El Salvador. And this is a similar thing. It's a similar type of thing that's happening right now. But I think the difference is back then, like nowadays, it's like the US and France and these other imperialist countries are, accused of supporting these groups. And I have to say it that way. But, the allegations are very strong that they're supporting these organizations in the Sahel, but they pretend to fight against them. Versus back in the day when they would run these death squads, it was like everybody kind of knew it, and it was like, I feel like it was more out in the open. I feel like compared to now, unfortunately, people just don't know, and the US and France like to pretend like they're on the right side and they're out here fighting the bad guys. It's not how it works. It's really not how things have happened over the last almost like 2.5 decades now of the so-called war on terror. I'll stop here.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, look, you know, as I mentioned before I turned it over to you, the biggest issue that you have, let's say that, you know, these were benevolent regime changes, right? They meant to do well by these regime changes, and there wasn't a destabilization effort by the West. Just the fact of changing regimes with the knowledge that you have, for example, a regime change in Germany. The United States has had military in Germany and has been helping to try to help Germany recover since World War II. When it comes to regime change in Iraq, in Libya, in all the countries where you've seen the United States openly push for regime change, you see what happens in those countries. So why do we continue to see the United States doing what they're doing? You know, obviously, you know, as I mentioned, that this is not necessarily, according to the leaders in AES, it's not benevolent, right? And this is purposeful. So I think, you know, we'll continue to report on these stories, continue to give you updates of what Ibrahim Traoré has been up to. Inem has to go. So any final words before we close out this live stream?
Hello? Sorry, I think my internet cut out for a second, but I think we're closing off. So I'll just say, like, I appreciate people tuning in, and just to give a final word, you know, I always like to end with a reading recommendation. So this week I'm recommending, this is actually, I think the first time I'm recommending a book that isn't necessarily explicitly Pan-African, but Africans need to be reading this. It's called Washington's Bullets by Vijay Prashad, and it breaks down how the United States in particular works towards crowd out its operation. So please check out the book Washington's Bullets by Vijay Prashad, because we got to know their strategies, we have to know their tactics, and we have to prepare ourselves and make sure that nothing can happen to our liberated zone in Africa, which is the Alliance of Sahel States.
Well put. So yes, it's called, Washington's Bullets, a history of the CIA. Sorry, I had the full name there. A history of the CIA coups and assassinations. All right, so Inem does have to go. I want to thank you guys all for watching. For those of you who have stayed on this long, make sure you subscribe to all the YouTube channels. Subscribe to Ahmed Caballo's YouTube channel. Subscribe to Authentic Africans YouTube channel. African Stream is still available on X, and they are available on Rumble, and they are on Patreon. Authentic African is still available across all platforms. So if you haven't already, subscribe and follow. We are on X as Authentic Afrique. It's shortened a bit because you can't have so many characters in your name. We are on Instagram. We are on YouTube. We are on Facebook, and we are on TikTok. So make sure you follow and subscribe, cross-pollinate across all platforms. We do go live weekly as Authentic African, and we cover the news of the day on the continent of Africa every single week for those of you who are interested in the news. So we will cover that weekly. Then Inem and I will be back monthly to go over deep dives into particular stories. As you saw today, it was Ibrahim Traoré and his effect and impact on Burkina Faso. In the future, we will cover other topics, but we will always be sure to give you guys an update on what's happening on the ground in the AES, because as I mentioned before, Inem is on the ground there, and she will be landing there in a couple of hours. She was out of the country for a while, but for a couple weeks, but she's actually heading back to where she lives in Burkina Faso and in between Burkina Faso and Niger. So just stay tuned. Weekly, again, we have news on the continent of Africa. Monthly, we will do the deep dives like we've done today. I also go live on Mondays about what life has been like for me on the continent. I just came back from about a month in West Africa. I was in Ghana and Sierra Leone, and I will be continuing to go back often, so you'll be able to hear what's happening in other parts of West Africa. And I also will continue to interview people who are developing and building on the continent of Africa. So stay tuned for all of that. So again, follow Authentic African across all platforms. And if you're watching from Authentic African side, make sure you follow African Stream across all platforms. With that, I think we will bring this thing to a close. I want to thank you all again for watching. Stay tuned. We will be back next week for This Week in Africa. I will go live again and pertaining to some things happening around the continent of Africa. And check out some of our previous live streams and videos if you want to get brought up to date on what's happening. With that, guys, I want to thank you all for watching. We'll see you guys all in the next video. Bye.